things. We've got the New York City local law that goes into effect today on Airbnbs, right? That should affect a lot of people, both who rent Airbnbs themselves and who seek to go into an Airbnb.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, since the Airbnb has become a thing, have turned it into a side income, or in some cases into a primary income. But as you know, it's been, especially in certain places, they've been fighting against it, especially the hotel lobby and whatnot, because people are kind of eating their lunch a little bit with it.
Right.
So in New York today, there's this law that goes into effect. What was that again? What was it?
Local law 18.
Yes. And so what it's basically doing is requiring people that's doing Airbnbs to register with the city. And only in places where they're living are they able to rent it. So what's happening, or what's going to happen, is if you want to rent something that's less than 30 days, you have to, the short-term rentals, you have to register with the city. I'm not sure if you have to do it for the longer ones, but there was an older law that was on the books that prevented short-term rentals of entire apartments for less than 30 days in New York.
Right.
But they couldn't enforce it, or they're having a hard time enforcing it.
So let's make that point clear, that most Airbnbs were already illegal in New York, but people were doing them regardless. And the city had a hard time cracking down on it. One of the reasons, aside from the registration mechanism that we're going to get now, one of the reasons why they couldn't do it was because Airbnb was still able to advertise those illegal listings and process the transaction. So in spite of them not being legal, there was still a mechanism in place that allowed the app to list them and process the fees. And so people were still doing it really unencumbered. Now, with this new law, Airbnb, and not just Airbnb, right? Other apps like it, there are others as well. Airbnb is
right. So this would be
all the short-term apps, right? Are covered by this. They are not going to be allowed now to even process these transactions. So it's not just that the rental itself is illegal, but the actual processing of the rental on the app is now illegal.
Right. And this is going to cut down people's ability. So for people who do this, if you don't register with the city, you can face a fine of up to $5,000. And they said that right now there's nearly 15,000 hosts that previously offered short-term available rentals across New York City. But as of August 18, the city had only approved 257 of the new 3,250 applications. So they're going to it's going to slow people down on either getting into it, or whether they're allowed to, I guess, get into it at all. Right.
And let's, again, make that clear for those who might not realize what is allowed and what isn't here. So a short-term rental is only going to be allowed, even if you register, right? Because you can have to register it, but you're only going to be able to do that if you are staying on the property, right? Like if you have an extra room in your house or something like that, but not if you want to rent out your entire apartment or your entire home to somebody.
Right. And some people, what they were doing, they would buy, separate apartments just for the purpose of renting it out, like that, like Airbnb. So that theoretically won't be allowed under this.
But that wasn't allowed prior to this either, right? It's just now there's a better mechanism in place for them to try to enforce it.
Right. So, and there was in the article that I read, there was a comment on one of the ladies that was doing this. She has a 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, but she lives somewhere else. And she said she didn't want to rent it full time to a tenant, and because she would lose the flexibility of hosting family or friends there whenever she saw fit, like she did during the pandemic, or she used it as a home office during the pandemic. So this Airbnb situation was perfect for her, but this is gonna become an issue for her.
Right.
Someone in the chat said, oh boy, Rockaway will be in trouble next beach season.
Yeah, no, that's not a bad point. There are a lot of people in the Rockaways and all over, especially in more touristy areas, right? Areas that attract out of towners. The Rockaway, they call them DFDs, down for the days, right? People who just come down to enjoy the beach. So it is going to have an effect on the local economy. There's no question about that. And I think it's a valid question to ask. Obviously, the hotel industry pushes back very strongly against these, but should we allow it, or should we be this strict? I mean, I'm assuming most people would agree there should be some kind of regulation on it, but how far should it go? Should it be a free for all? Should we allow the traditional Airbnb? Because as we said, we really don't right now, right? What is legal is not the standard Airbnb rental arrangement that we see. When we think of Airbnb being in place, we're not thinking of this.
Right. And again, I think that was another question I think should be brought up. Should people be allowed to rent out places that they have? Like, I mean, it's their place, should
if it is their place. I mean, what if, because don't forget, this is New York City, right? So
right.
You have a lot of people who are renting their apartments in the first place. They don't own where they live. Oftentimes you'll see it in the contract, right? In the lease agreement, when you rent a place,
no subletting,
absolutely no Airbnb, no subletting of any kind, no short-term rentals. Like, the landlord is renting it to you. You're not allowed to rent it to somebody else.
Right.
Even if it didn't have that in the contract, should that be allowed? Should we allow people to say, okay, I'm going to rent an apartment from this landlord for a certain amount per month. I'm then going to try to make more money by renting it to other people. The landlord didn't sign up for that. I mean, should that be legal in the first place?
Right. So, and then, if we look at it from the consumer point of view, you could say it takes away choice, because Airbnb is a different experience than a hotel, right? Absolutely. The situation, the amenities could be different, the locations could be better or different, because an Airbnb could be in a neighborhood where you're trying to be around versus having to be in a row of hotels where you've got to do more traveling. It could be more convenient. Prices could be better, or they could be more expensive, depends on who's running it. So
right. And when I was working in the Senate, one of the main arguments that the hotel lobby would use is that there's a lot of racism on the app because there isn't as much regulation, and people on there are not only free to discriminate, not that they're legally allowed to, still have the civil rights laws, but that there's really nothing in place that would stop them from discriminating, whereas the hotel industry is much more regulated. And so that kind of thing is more easily cracked down against on the hotel side. That was at least their argument. I mean, you might not even believe that that's true. If the Airbnb host can discriminate, maybe the hotel clerk can the same way, right? But that's at least what they were trying to say, that there are stronger regulations in place on them, and that because people were able to discriminate freely on these Airbnb-like sites, that was happening at a much higher level. And so we needed to crack down on them for that reason. Some people would say, and I don't agree with this line of thought, but you do see, especially more libertarian types, they'll say, well, the market will correct itself. So if they're discriminating, then people will not stop using them and they can go out of business. Unfortunately, that's not quite the way the world operates, right? It would be nice if things work that way. But we do need regulations. We need checks, right? Otherwise, things do get out of hand. I mean, we see that time and time again.
Yeah. So that's definitely good. And that question of regulation was one that also came up with when Lyft and Uber came in.
Yeah.
They're saying like the standard industry, like taxis, which would be like the hotel industry, has to follow these regulations, which has a little more of these checks and things in place that these app-based businesses didn't have, which some things could fall under the radar with.
Right. I mean, and one difference is it is easier. Let's be clear. If you're renting out a place on Airbnb, you can turn someone down for an unspecified reason. You can say it's my apartment, my house, my property. I'm not going to accept this booking, right?
Right.
The hotel does have a harder time doing that, right? If someone walks into the hotel, then they can lie. They can say, well, there's no vacancy or whatever. But generally speaking, they can't just be like, oh, we're declining to rent you the room for no reason. Get out. You know what I mean? Like that would be much more controversial, especially if it was a protected class, if it was a person of color or a disabled person or what have you, right? Coming in, just being denied access to the hotel. So you can see how it is easier to, I guess, get away with that type of discrimination on an app like that.
Right. And it does happen. There was several investigations that found that this type of discrimination was happening with Airbnb hosts. but like I said, there's more regulation in the hotel industry, but it does happen there as well.
It does.
Um,
And, the entirety of the civil rights laws in this country really comes from the hotel accommodations, right? That was the famous, that's why we were able to pass civil rights laws at the federal level, because the question is, well, what is a constitutional authority to do something like that? For the federal
Right.
government to pass any type of legislation, there needs to be explicit constitutional authority to do so. It was tied to the Commerce Clause, the Interstate Commerce Clause. The federal government can regulate the interstate commerce. Hotels clearly are part of interstate commerce because they're often on highways and people are traveling from state to state. They pull over, they go to a hotel. And so that's how the federal government was able to justify passing the civil rights law, saying that discrimination would be illegal. How could they do that? Because in hotels, that was the example used, right? Hotels were part of the interstate commerce system in the country because they were right next to the freeways. People would get off when they would on these long road trips. So, I think
right.
the regulation of civil rights as it relates to hotels is kind of inherent. It's like baked into the country. That's our whole civil rights framework kind of stems from that. This Airbnb thing, like we said, is new and been largely unregulated to this point.
Right. So, but yeah, I mean, again, yeah, there is a point on both sides there. Again, with, like I said, it does happen with the Airbnb, probably less in the hotel industry, although it does happen there as well, because it happened to us, to my family in the 80s. We were traveling and they wouldn't rent to us.
Right. So we are joined once again by Sheba Abraham from the League of Women Voters. Thank you for joining us. Sheba, we're in the middle of a great discussion on the new law that's taking effect today in New York City that cracks down on Airbnbs and other short-term rentals.
I did see that. I read that, but what's unfortunate is that the city will fine the homeowners $5,200.
If they don't register.
Right.
Yeah.
So why would they do that when people are struggling with taxes in New York City? The taxes are so high.
They're supposed to register the rental with the city.
Right. It's a way to make sure that if they are renting their home, they're doing so within the bounds of the regulations, meaning that they're not supposed to just rent it and not be there, just to rent it like a hotel. They're supposed to rent it if they have an extra room in their house or something, that they're going to be staying there. Most people on Airbnb don't rent that way, but that's what the law. So it's a way to try to enforce that previously existing law. So you have to register, and in addition, these sites, the apps, no longer going to be able to process these illegal transactions. What I just found interesting is I was on the city's website just now, and there's an application process that you would have to go through in order to register. But it says on there, before you register, check to make sure that you're not in a building that's on the prohibited buildings list. So they already have a list.
Right.
It looks like there's 50 buildings that are ineligible for registration for short-term rentals. Interestingly, I'm scrolling through this list right now. All 50 of them are in Brooklyn. It's like no
so landlords can ban the entire building from the short-term rental platforms.
That's what this is. So these are the landlords who are telling the city, we want our entire building banned.
Right. And according to the article on Wired, there's a list of nearly 9,000 buildings across New York City that are on that list of.
Oh, is that what it is? Because I'm on a site, right? I could put the link in the chat. Maybe it's only showing me the first 50 then, because it just has a list. It says building address, and you can scroll through it, and it says 1 through 15 of 50. You click next, and it goes to 16 through 30 and so on. But it's only showing me 50 properties on here. But there's also a search bar. So maybe if you typed in your address in a search bar, it would show you maybe a lot more in the database than it's showing on the screen.
But what I read,
it looks like there's a whole database.
So the 50 on the screen that come up are just in Brooklyn.
Okay.
But what I read in the New York Post today was that it was 1 to 2 family homes could no longer rent their properties out. Well, now they were renting their properties in New York City as Airbnbs. Is that it? Or when people came into the country, they would rent their properties out for short-term stays. Is that correct?
People came into the country.
Yep, travelers. People that travel that wanted to stay. Say that you want to stay in some place quaint. You don't want to stay in a hotel.
Right.
Someone's offering
Oh,
their
yeah.
home.
It's
So
a very common. It's a very common practice all over the country, all over the world.
right. But now New York City's cracking down on that, correct?
Correct. And like we
So-
said, it was really illegal already. Most of the
Right.
Airbnbs that we think of, when we think of Airbnbs, that was already illegal. It just was very hard for them to enforce it. So now they're trying to make it easier to crack down on it by having this registration system and, you know, try to have some teeth to it, because people were doing it in spite of it being illegal.
Right.
But they were doing it for extra income. And according to the article, they said it's doomsday for New York City because those the monies that these homeowners were receiving were helping them out, especially if they were elderly.
Well, and that's a very valid question. I think we should be asking this question. Should we be cracking down on it to this extent?
Right. Or should be, you know, maybe, I mean, there was a rule in place, like I said, the law was already there. Should there be some way to try to make this easier and to, you know, make some kind of concessions in that law? So people are allowed to be able to do what they
Right.
do for their home with their homes and whatnot.
Especially
But for people who have extra
right? I mean,
rooms,
let's put the idea that people are renting apartments from landlords in the first place aside. What if you own the house? Because, you know, like here in Howard Beach, a lot of parts in Queens, people own their own homes. Should they be able to rent them out short term? I mean, it is their property, right? Is it a
I think
violation
so.
of their property rights for the city to tell them no, they can't do it?
right? And that's
Right.
what was on the books. Like you couldn't do it for less than 30 days.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I think they should be allowed to. I do think there should be some, you know, it does set up kind of an unfair situation if the hotel industry has certain regulations to follow and Airbnb hosts can get away with certain things that they can't. So maybe it just needs to be looked at a little bit more in that regard.
Well,
Should-
according to the article, the law was poorly written.
Well, it probably didn't take into, it was probably written before we had mobile apps and things, so.
No, I think she's talking about the new one, right? The new law. that
Right,
was-
the new one.
Oh, the new one.
that just-
So
yeah,
apparently Sheba is referencing an editorial that came out that was very much against this new law.
yes.
Okay, okay.
And they mentioned that the law, and I quote, was poorly written.
Hmm,
And it gave the council, the city council members that said no, I think was like 4, but the majority of those, I guess, who wrote this law or had something to do with the law voted yes,
hmm,
that it should pass.
Yeah, it passed with a great deal of support in the city.
Yeah.
As I was saying, when I was working, I wasn't working for the city, but I was working for the New York State Senate, and the hotel lobby was pretty persistent in trying to push back. They're trying to get, even at the state level, the legislators to come out against all the short-term rentals. And they were saying things like, you know, listen, if they want to be hotels and treat them like hotels, they should have to be regulated the same exact way as hotels. They shouldn't get away with acting like hotels, but not having the regulations on them.
But don't you think that's a little bit intrusive? I mean, that's my own home. That's my own home. If someone wants to rent a room from me for a day or two, what business is it of the hotel industry?
Because they're losing money. That's why it's their business.
yeah, that's what they're interested
It's
in.
literally
But
their business.
but fair point.
Yeah,
You know,
it is.
yeah, it is. It's your home. Like you know, how should they be able to stop you from doing something like that? You know,
But what they're
especially
saying though is that you are no longer using your home as a home, you're converting your home into a hotel. So why
Right.
should you have to get licensed and regulated the same way that they are if now you're going to
Right.
be in the business of having a hotel? Like, you know, you could run a business, any business out of your home, but you're supposed to be regulated and licensed. Just because it's in your house doesn't mean that you're exempt from operating under the rules that regulate that business, right?
right. So So this is gonna, yeah, this is definitely going to affect the Airbnb situation in New York for sure. Um, so
So I mean, I guess that should be the poll question of the week, right?
go for it.
Gotta get people's thoughts on this. So the poll question of the week is, do you believe that short-term rentals such as Airbnb should be illegal?
Yeah, illegal or more regulated, or but yeah, we'll see. I'm assuming most people will disagree that it should be illegal, because I think a lot of people, it's been around long enough now that Airbnb is a common option when people look for places to stay now. It's not like a
Vacation. Yeah,
novelty.
absolutely. It has become the norm.
Right.
Because in Miami, they have what you call hostels.
Oh
They're
yeah,
not
they're all over.
hotel. Have you heard of
Yeah.
hostels?
I actually went into a hostel. I didn't stay there, but I walked into a hostel in Miami just to see what it was like. Yeah, I'm definitely familiar with it. In fact,
Yeah,
there's a guy in there. I don't know what he was referencing exactly, but his question is, do you want 1 stack or 2 stacks? I'm thinking like, is it
pancakes?
the stack of bunk beds that we're gonna be sleeping in? I'm not sure.
Oh,
Is that
yeah, right.
pancakes or
Yeah.
what?
Right.
And you know, my daughter.
Yeah, like a funny, he kind of sounded like a Muppet a little bit. You're like, do you want 1 stack or 2 stacks? This is even me. I'm just checking. Like, I wasn't really serious about staying there. I was curious because I saw it on the street. I was like, what, what's this about?
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that you have a lot of Europeans
Yeah.
and people, I would say, like
Yep.
from South America, Europeans, they stay in those hostels when they come to Miami. And my daughter, she stayed in one when she went to Miami, and she said she liked it. She said
Yeah.
she met, so everybody looks out for one another. You meet people from all over the world. She really, really liked it.
Yeah, I've stayed in hostels before.
You know
They
what?
have
The
something here as
name
well.
makes it sound kind of dangerous. Hostile, right? It
No,
sounds. I know there's a
no,
scary
that's how
movie
it
about
is.
it too, I think, right? Wasn't
It's,
there a scary movie called Hostel not long ago?
no,
I don't know.
it's a
I wouldn't
European.
doubt it.
No, it's a European. That's a European for where they stay in those places like that.
Mhm.
So they say so that they know when they come here, they know they can find hostels. It's just because that's what it's called
Well, and
when
they're
they stay.
cheaper than hotels are typically.
Yeah, it
Generally,
is.
yeah, they're cheaper than hotels, and it's just more of, you got like bunk bed rooms, or it can be different types of way, but rooms with a bunch of beds in it, and then they share a common area.
Right. But see, my thing is this: when I go on vacation, generally speaking, I like to be more comfortable. And even if it's going to cost more money, if I can afford it, I want to treat myself. So it's vacation. So I'm trying to be as comfortable and luxurious as I can be within reason. But it's a thing now, right? If I'm going to go someplace and some friends are coming along, even for a political thing, sometimes we go out of state for conferences or what have you, they'll be like, why don't we get an Airbnb instead of a hotel? And
Right.
I'll ask them why do you want to get an Airbnb? And they'll say, well, this way we can cook. And I don't want to cook. If I'm going away, I want to eat out. Now I can see if you're going to be maybe staying in a place for a month and you're thinking it's going to be pricey and I don't want to eat out every day. It would be nice to have a kitchen where I can bring food in, or I can see something like that. But if I'm going away for a weekend or for a week, if I can avoid it, I'm not going to do the Airbnb. I would prefer the hotel in most cases.
But you don't cook anyway.
But some people like the Airbnb because it's, they're not, some people don't like the atmosphere of hotels where you're around a lot of people.
Right. Well,
you could be by your, I'm sorry.
No, I was gonna say that when on that point, like it's one benefit of an Airbnb when you're going out with a group is like you can all stay together, right? And so there's that added, I guess, bonus, especially if it's a family or if it's a group of friends. You can all have it. You have your different room in the house, but you're all in the same place together. And
right. And yeah,
so
that is true.
one.
I think the hotel room is more for just sleeping, really, hanging out at night. When you're with people, like if you're in a group, you're usually not going to all hang out in a hotel room. Sometimes they do, like caucus weekend and Albany, you'll get like a bunch of people pre-gaming in someone's hotel room. They do that kind of thing. But for the most part, I can see that if you have a nice big house that you're renting on Airbnb or a site like that, you guys can all hang out in a living room and a dining room. If you want to cook, you can cook, and it's like you're staying in a house together. I do get the appeal in that, but I prefer
Right.
to have a hotel room and I can order room service and be pampered like I'm on vacation, as opposed to just having a house that, that's like a different setting from where I normally live, but the the quality of life is not any different.
Well,
Looks
why
like
did New York?
Deborah's with you on that one, Mike. She's like, Mike, YOLO, go treat yourself.
Yeah, it's vacation, right? I don't want a vacation to a house that's similar to the house I'm in when I'm not on vacation. Like, no, I'm trying to go someplace nice and live it
But
up.
I thought the Airbnbs are upscale. It
They're all
depends
different
on,
kinds. No, so
right,
here's
but
another thing. I did an Airbnb, so no, they're all different kinds, and sometimes you don't know what you're getting into. You should look at the reviews, but sometimes there aren't enough reviews, or they can be deceiving or whatever. Because I
this is
actually did
true.
one in not Miami, but South Florida. It was an Airbnb, but it was a hotel, and it was a hotel that they apparently sold half of the rooms to private people as condos or whatever. And then they were in turn renting them out. So check this out, right? This wasn't even someone renting out their house as a hotel. They were literally renting out a hotel room that they bought as their own private hotel operation. And so this hotel that you were staying at, some of the rooms were still owned by the hotel. Some of the rooms were privately owned, but being rented by people on Airbnb. And it was very odd. And it wasn't very nice. Like, it wasn't, because you expect it, because you're in a hotel and you expect that experience of a hotel, but now it's not. Now it's just a room that someone owns and they're renting to you, and you don't get the accommodations you would get at a regular hotel if it was hotel operated. You're not going to call anyone for room service. They're like, you're on your own. It's you're
Well,
just
Right.
Mike, you can run into some terrible hotels. You can get, you can run into some terrible hotels too.
Yeah, Mike, remember remember the hotel that we stayed in when we went to the Obama inauguration?
Okay. Yes.
Remember the whole place smelled like smoke.
We had
It
to go
was
to
like,
CVS and disinfect the room.
yeah, we had to disinfect the room because that was the only thing available.
That's what it was, right? It was the night before the inauguration in January 2009. And all the hotel rooms were either booked or asking astronomical prices. That was the one hotel that I think didn't get the memo that it was inauguration weekend, and they gave us regular prices.
Now, see, had it been an Airbnb or someone's home, you probably would have got a better price.
Maybe
And a
not.
nicer stay.
They can charge what they want, right? It's all about supply and demand.
Yeah.
This
So
is
it'll be
true.
interesting. It'll be an interesting poll to see what people have to say